Hi there. My name's Dave Blewett. I'm with Fish and Wildlife Conservation, the Fisheries Independent Monitoring Group out of Charlotte Harbor. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how limited connections to the estuary help juvenile snook and tarpon. All right, here's a look at the Cape Hayes Peninsula. And it really is a beautiful place. It's pretty vast, pretty remote, pristine area. And I would say in Southwest Florida, it's probably one of the most natural areas north of the 10,000 Islands. In 2003 and 2004, we studied juvenile sport fish in several salt marsh ponds in this area. And what we found was that these areas were incredibly productive for juvenile snook and tarpon. Here's a little bit of a close-up of some of the ponds, and you can kind of see the salt marsh flats. But what I want you to notice about this image is take a look at these ponds and look how they look. They look somewhat isolated, but you don't see any real major creeks going into these ponds. You don't see any big connections to the estuary. And so as we study the fish here, we're seeing literally thousands of juvenile snook, hundreds of tarpon in these ponds. And so we wanted to know more about the connections. And so we did some exploring. And what we discovered was that these fish are actually moving over large expanse of black mangrove forest in order to get to these ponds. So that was the slide I wanted to have up. So that's the view of the black mangrove forest that those fish are traveling over. So it kind of works like there's these opportunistic times where these fish are able to get into these ponds. As the summer rains increase or we get heavy rains, those heavy rains meet summer high tides or tropical storms, and it provides an opportunistic time for these fish to scoot over that marsh surface and get into these salt marsh ponds where they're protected from large predators like jack crevalle, red drum, even larger snook. And during the dry season, there's going to be marsh surface is going to be drier. These fish are going to grow up in these salt marsh ponds. There's lots of prey there. There's mosquito fish, sailfin mollies. We've even seen anchovies back in these creeks. And so they grow up, and then the following year, when the marsh floods again, and during opportunistic times, they're able to leave. And there'll be about 8 to 10 inches at that point. So there's really quite a few limited connections to the estuary when we look in the wild. But and actually in the Cape Hayes Peninsula alone, there's over 60 ponds that have the potential for nursery habitat. And but limited connections are rare in urban landscapes. In urban landscapes, there's typically the wide open areas for salt water, which are our canals that we build our homes on. And then there's these closed areas for salt water. These are the lakes, freshwater canals, and most stormwater systems are set up for getting rid of fresh water and not allowing brackish water in. And I think this slide was inspired by John Cougar Mellencamp. However, there is a great potential to enhance urban aquatic habitats by incorporating key principles found in nature and by finding creative engineering solutions that mimic certain natural landscapes. For instance, the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, located in a highly urban area, they had an issue with, or they wanted to reduce annual runoff and pollutant discharge to the Gordon River. And so they had a great idea of building a filter marsh on their property. And so this is the habitat they had, was a freshwater ditch, one-way flow to the estuarine waters. This is what they ended up creating: a detention pond, a filter marsh, estuarine and freshwater mixing zones. And they actually used limestone caprock. And an amazing thing happened was they didn't just get good water quality. They attracted a lot of juvenile sport fish like snook and tarpon and largemouth bass. Thank you.